We begin, though, of course, this morning with former President Donald Trump, who's now officially charged in the Department of Justice's classified documents investigation.
Trump pleaded not guilty in a federal courthouse in Miami yesterday to 37 criminal counts. Prosecutors are alleging that he knowingly and unlawfully kept classified documents after leaving the White House. While the brief arraignment played out inside, protesters and supporters lined the streets outside the courthouse. People could even be seen running after the motorcade as it made its way through the streets following that hearing. Well, following his court appearance, Trump met with supporters during a stop at Versailles restaurant in Miami. From there, it was on to New Jersey, where he delivered a speech during a fundraiser at his golf club in New Jersey, blasting the investigation and maintaining he did nothing wrong. We have a full team covering every angle of this story, from what happened in Miami to what happens next. So we are going to start with NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delaney and legal analyst Danny Savalas. Thanks for being with us this morning. So, Ken, the case may be high profile, but the court proceedings were pretty straightforward. What stood out to you, and what was Trump's reaction during it?
Good morning, Lindsay. That's right. It was a fairly rudimentary, bare bones, straightforward hearing, but there was nothing rudimentary about hearing the federal magistrate announce the case, the United States versus Donald J. Trump and Walt Nauta, his co-defendant. In terms of Mr. Trump's reaction, he was I described it as stone-faced. He sat still with his arms crossed. He didn't appear to be consulting with his attorneys, who did all the speaking for him. What was also interesting was special counsel Jack Smith was in the room. He was not at the prosecution table, but he was sitting in the gallery, and he could be observed sort of laughing and joking at times with some of the people next to him, but also staring intently at Mr. Trump throughout the process. His lawyer, Mr. Trump's lawyer, Todd Blanche, answered the judge's question about the plea by saying, "We most certainly plead not guilty." That's essentially how the arraignment moved forward. Mr. Nauta, his co-defendant, was not actually arraigned because he didn't have local counsel who could represent him in Florida, so he'll be arraigned at a later date. Obviously, both men were released on their own recognizance, so the whole thing lasted less than an hour, and then you saw Mr. Trump move on to a kind of a landmark Cuban restaurant in Florida, which he treated sort of as a campaign event, guys.
Danny, let's bring you in here on set with us. So special counsel Jack Smith, who brought this, is calling for a speedy trial, but that depends on Judge Aileen Cannon, right? Of course, that's this Trump appointee who randomly was selected to have this case in her courtroom. Tell us what that means in terms of speed here.
It does, and had this been the regular magistrate assigned to Judge Cannon, we might have gotten some idea of scheduling yesterday, but my understanding is that this was just a general assignment federal magistrate, which is also a judge, but they exist as kind of an assistance role to federal district judges. But the bottom line is Judge Aileen Cannon will end up handling the scheduling of this case. Will the case stick to that schedule? I bet no, because unexpected things are going to happen. This is a very significant case, a lot of very complex issues. I promise you the defense will be filing a jubilee of motions, either to throw the case out, to suppress evidence, all kinds of things that will extend the time and delay the trial. And by the way, there's nothing nefarious about delay in this case. It probably inures to the benefit of the defendant, but the defendant will be filing lots of motions. Anytime you have a novel, arguably novel application of the law in an unprecedented situation, as a defense attorney, you've got to test the law, if not just for the district court, but for the appeals court. If things go badly, your client's convicted, you have a shot on appeal with a relatively new, fresh issue.
We're talking about what's going on inside, but Ken, let's talk about what happened outside the courthouse, because Miami police said they were expecting as many as 50,000 demonstrators. I mean, did we see anything close to those kinds of numbers?
I don't think we saw 500, actually, no. I mean, there was the people who did show up were passionate in their beliefs and support of Mr. Trump, and they gathered around the courthouse, but as far as we know, there were no reports of violence. The sort of most notable incident happened when a man who was apparently a Biden supporter tried to rush the Trump motorcade as it was leaving. There you see it, and he was quickly arrested. But no, and in fact, it was consistent with what we were hearing from the FBI and other agencies that they didn't detect any major threats of violence. Nonetheless, it's always a tense situation with Mr. Trump and his very passionate supporters. Particularly, the perimeter around this courthouse was more wide open than we expected it to be, although there were a lot of security officers here.
And Danny, one of the kind of quirks here, so we heard Ken mentioned him a moment ago. His valet, this person that works for him, his co-conspirator in this case, also facing charges, also in court yesterday. They are still working together. He still works for Mr. Trump while this unfolds. Does that complicate things?
Absolutely it does. And this order by the judge restricting the defendant's ability to speak to people in their circle, not just Nauta, the alleged co-conspirator and current co-defendant, but a number of other a number of other sources of information for DOJ. Let's take a step back. The judge said, look, DOJ, you need to come up with a list of the people that Trump can't talk to. But in the meantime, Trump, you can talk to those people because you don't know who's on the list. That seems a little awkward, right? Because these are people that may still work for him. Trump may have people in his office who will be offering evidence against him at trial, and he doesn't know it yet. Talk about an awkward workplace environment. So when DOJ comes out with that list, then Trump can no longer talk to those people. He cannot talk to his co-defendant without counsel present. Very awkward situation because they probably have a joint defense agreement, I'm guessing, which means that they can pool information and keep it privileged. So you have a strange situation where they're essentially acting as a team, but as a team with limitations on communication.
Really quickly, there's been some talk of whether Nauta will flip or not. I mean, that joint defense agreement, can that essentially elapse or vaporize at any point?
Poof. It goes away as soon as, and this happens all the time. There's been a lot of reporting about how Walt Nauta, they tried to get him to come in and cooperate. He's not interested. He's holding fast. Yeah, that's today. In 3 months from now, in 6 months from now, when the trial is looming and the fatigue sets in and Nauta starts thinking about, oh, what are my sentencing guidelines if I'm convicted? These folks, they change their mind. Happens all the time.
Okay, Ken and Danny, thank you both so much.
Thank you. Now, of course, this is all playing out while Trump is running for re-election. He's a former president, but also now, again, a candidate. Let's turn to NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray on this. Hey, Mark, so directly after the arraignment, we've been talking about this morning, Trump made this visit to this restaurant in Miami, Versailles. It really looked like a classic campaign stop, and this particular location does hold some significance in South Florida politics, doesn't it? Tell us about this stop and what it signals.
Yeah, Savannah, in all the years I've been covering politics, Versailles, if you are a Republican candidate for any type of office, you make stops there. It has diehard Cuban-American supporters, mainly Republican. And the fact that Donald Trump went there with cameras to be able to actually have people take images of him versus the situation that was playing out in the courtroom where you just ended up having artist drawings and no cameras does kind of just strike home the argument that Donald Trump was really trying to control his image immediately after the arraignment.
And then let's talk about what we saw later that night. Once Trump made it back to New Jersey, he spoke at this campaign fundraising event at his golf club. I know he went after the current president. He came out sort of as the victim here. Walk us through his message.
Yeah, the message was first that he had every right to the documents that were in his possession at Mar-a-Lago. Now, according to the Presidential Records Act, that official presidential documents are actually in the possession of the National Archives, not the former president. So that was factually incorrect what the former president was saying there. He also ended up lashing out at special counsel Jack Smith, who was in attendance at yesterday's arraignment. And then he ended up vowing retribution and saying that if he ends up winning the White House in 2024, he will appoint a special counsel to look into President Joe Biden and his family.
So, Mark, let's talk about now widening this out to just GOP contenders in general and how this is impacting the current race, because Trump is still the front runner by double digits, a lot of them at that. And so Chris Christie, he's really the only one who's not fully shied away from speaking out against him. Yesterday, Christie tweeted, "We need to stop blaming our adversaries for the weakness of our candidates. It's Trump. He's a three-time loser, 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 loser." But that's a little bit rare in terms of the forcefulness that we are seeing come out, because, of course, I think people are thinking, if you go after Trump, are you kind of alienating his supporters, which, again, is most of those Republican voters at this point. How is this case shaking up the primary?
Yeah, there is the argument that if you want to be able to defeat Donald Trump, you have to go after him right now and hit him very hard. But as you ended up mentioning, when you look at a lot of the early polls right now, where 3/4 or 4 and 5 Republicans believe that Donald Trump is some kind of victim of a weaponization of Justice Department, that this is politically motivated, it is really hard to end up going right after Donald Trump here when many of the voters might not be there. Now, Savannah, it's important to note that maybe public opinion does change, that if some of these candidates, notably Ron DeSantis or Tim Scott or Nikki Haley, take him head on, maybe that moves voters right now. We're going to have to wait and see. But right now, outside of Chris Christie, it's a lot of crickets.
That's right, crickets. Mark Murray, thank you so much.
Let's bring in NBC News congressional correspondent Julie Sturkin. So, Julie, good morning. We are hearing for the first time from Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. What's his take on the allegations?
Well, his take is that he's going to essentially stay out of it, much of which we heard after the first time the former president was indicted in New York. The minority leader of the Senate, Republican Mitch McConnell, largely staying silent on this issue. He hasn't commented on it at all since the indictment fell, since the indictment was unsealed on Friday as well. Take a listen to what he told reporters yesterday when asked about this.
Look, the Republican campaign for the nomination has already been going on for 6 months. It's going to be going on for a year longer. And I'm just simply not going to comment on the candidates. We've got a bunch of them, and I'm just simply going to stay out of it.
Now, obviously, it's no secret that privately and publicly, Mitch McConnell and the former President Trump don't have a very good relationship. So his comments do track with his prior ones.
Some congressional Republicans, Julie, including House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, have come to Trump's defense. Not all GOP members are jumping on board, as Savannah and Mark were just talking about. What are some of the concerns they're sharing about Trump as he runs for president again?
Yeah, well, it's super notable. You're looking at this divide sort of grow among Republicans in Congress. And it's interesting because really at the tip of the spear, obviously you have Speaker McCarthy and leadership who is very much looking into this in the corner of the former president. But you're hearing from a plethora of voices, not just moderates like Senator Murkowski and Romney, who said that this was essentially a stain. Romney said that he was angry that the former president brought this upon himself. He could have just handed those documents over when asked, but also from prominent conservatives, some on the hard right in the House, for example, like Ken Buck, the Colorado congressman, who was just, by the way, holding up the floor so Speaker McCarthy couldn't use it as he wanted to. He said he would have major concerns if there was, quote, a convicted felon in the White House, even if he ended up winning the party's nomination, as Savannah was just saying. He's ahead by those double digits. But it's notable you're hearing this divide from different Republicans who are not in the former president's corner, who perhaps are looking at other candidates in light of this as well.
And Julie, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance announced yesterday he's putting a hold on Justice Department nominees in response to Trump's indictment and arraignment. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so Vance actually tweeted, quote, "I think we have to grind this department to a halt until Merrick Garland, the attorney general, promises to do his job and stop going after political opponents." Vance has endorsed the former president. He was one of the earliest endorsements in Congress for Trump. And he essentially is saying that he's going to slow down the confirmation process for Department of Justice nominees. There are a whole slew of them. It's not clear how much leverage he's going to have because, of course, they will still end up getting confirmed. He can slow them down, but he can't stop them from happening. But it's not clear what exactly he's looking for. He says he wants Garland to stop holding political opponents hostage in this situation, but he's not saying what would get him to lift that hold. Nonetheless, though, it shows the influence that the former president continues to have, particularly among his supporters, in Congress.
All right, Julie, thank you so much.
Well, NBC News presidential historian Michael Beschloss joins us now with his analysis on this. We're always lucky to get him on a morning like this. Hey, Michael, good to see you. Hi. So I know you have called this one of the most important criminal trials in American history. Of course, it being the first time that a former president or a current president is being charged with a federal crime. Just put the historical significance in context for us.
Well, you know, it's really mind-blowing, Savannah and Lindsay, and I shouldn't chuckle because it's not a bit funny, but think when in American history we have seen something like this. Donald, oftentimes, you and I could talk and we could say this is what historians might think about Donald Trump. First thing we've got to know is that 18 months from now, and this is conceivable. Is he going back to the White House as the 47th president of the United States? Is he going to prison? Is he getting off on some of these trials? I mean, the range of possibilities is wider than we've seen in the case of any other president in American life. And so on the outcome of this case and others that are in train and perhaps about to happen is really the future of our country.
Michael, we obviously don't know the outcome in the case yet, but it has already been historic. So how does all this affect Trump's legacy and also the legacies of both his supporters and enemies in the GOP?
It totally depends on what happens. You know, if Donald Trump is reelected next year in the fall, which I'm not predicting one way or the other, but if he is, he's going to make this into a very different kind of country and a different kind of government. He has said that. And in that atmosphere, there will be people who will say, you know, this is what led to current president of the United States. You know, this is the way that other leaders in America should behave. But the other alternative, or at least an other alternative, is if he is found guilty, if he is punished, particularly if he's incarcerated, there's not a great record in American history of people who have been incarcerated, and if the public feels that that was a fair trial, being considered very, very nicely by people in my line of work.
Michael, there's been some talk about the fact that this case is taking place in Miami, Florida, rather than in Washington, D.C., where we kind of knew this investigation was split in both of those places. What's the significance of that? The location of this, the fact that this trial with this particular president in this particular party taking place in Miami, Florida?
Well, there's a lot of attention to the fact that, as we know, Lindsay and Savannah, this is a case where Florida is a steadily more red state. The area in which this trial is going to take place is a steadily more red area. And also the judge in this trial is someone who was an outspoken Trump supporter and went to the edge of making rulings that were in his favor on this documents case earlier in a special master that caused her to be reprimanded by some of her colleagues and superiors. So, you know, if we're looking at a news story that is unpredictable, I cannot think of one more unpredictable than this.
Absolutely. Well, Michael Beschloss, thank you so much. Again, we appreciate your expertise this morning.
My pleasure always.
Evacuation orders have been issued for parts of northern Oregon because of a fast-moving wildfire. The so-called Hat Rock fire is burning near Juniper Canyon. It's already consumed more than 10,000 acres in just a matter of hours. Now it is rapidly moving toward the Washington state line. So last night, officials called in extra fire crews from surrounding areas, and they're telling people in the fire's path to pack their bags and be ready to evacuate.
Let's now get to that, as well as the severe storms headed for the southeast that could impact millions.
So for more on that, let's get a check on your morning news now weather with meteorologist Angie Lastman. Angie, good to see you.
Good to see you guys as well. Good morning. We've got a pretty rare kind of severe setup today. This is more something that you see in the middle of the spring, right? This is kind of setup where we have the potential for really strong wind gusts for large swaths of people. We also have the potential for some really strong tornadoes, too, throughout the afternoon and into the evening hours, and kind of two different batches of these storms moving through. Either way, 23 million people included in this. We will see the potential for some large hail as well. Here's the area for those wind gusts. Over 80 miles per hour or higher is what we're looking at as far as the threat is concerned. Montgomery included in that, Monroe included in that. And you can see it extends all the way from the Atlantic into places like Texas, Louisiana, and parts of Arkansas. So you're going to want to be staying connected at least with a way to get those alerts later into the afternoon and evening hours tonight. Remember, there will be one line that comes through and then a secondary line that comes through. So don't let your guard down if you live in that area. As we head through Thursday, we'll have the potential to see some heavy rain associated with this as well. Upwards of maybe 3 to 5 inches will be possible. So the flash flooding risk will be there here, at least for the next 2 days. You can see where it extends. Again, same kind of area, same region. And even as we get into tomorrow, we could still see some strong thunderstorms in this area. Maybe not quite what we're going to deal with through the day today, but the potential will be there for some more thunderstorms. Looking up towards the northeast and kind of swirling around the Great Lakes, we have a low pressure system that's going to bring some of that additional rain to folks in that region. We'll see some localized heavy amounts of rain, nothing too impressive, but necessary for some of these drier conditions that we're dealing with. That cold front is going to continue swinging through the Great Lakes here as we get into tomorrow. We'll still see some rain hanging around for places like Maine, Maine and Michigan, Ohio as well. Now, as we look towards Texas, this might have gotten your attention yesterday. We have heat alerts that are in place because temperatures are just soaring there, feeling really warm with these heat watch areas dealing with potentially numbers as high as 115 degrees.
Wow.
Here is what we're expecting today. These are the highs on the left. You see places like Fort Stockton, 101, 101 for Del Rio, but feeling like 105. Even Laredo headed to 116 for your heat index value later today. And this is an extended kind of heat wave. It's going to go through Friday into Saturday for a lot of places. You see triple digits across the board for San Angelo, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And again, you add in humidity, and it's a whole lot more uncomfortable for those locations. Take it slow if you have any strenuous activity to do outdoors. Milder, of course, in the Northeast and the Great Lakes, but man, that sure gets your attention, huh?
Oh, yeah.
I'm from Phoenix.
Yeah, well, as they say, that's a dry heat.
120. Yeah, I know. The humidity is no joke, though.
Ooh, my goodness. And I love your Wednesday pink.
Oh,
You look
thank
great.
you.
Thanks, Angie.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.